In this video, we're gonna configure CircleCI continuous integration. Every time when we change our code, commit and push it to our remote repository, CircleCI will detect the change and it will test our code and create the Docker image and upload it to AWS ECR Repository. Okay, let's get started by creating the AWS ECR Repository first. Let's go to the AWS console and type container. And let's go to the Elastic Container Registry. And then let's click repositories and create new repository. It's gonna be private one and we're gonna call it Slack CI/CD. The rest of the fields we will leave default. We're not gonna change anything. And let's click create. All right, so we have now the repository. The next step is to create the user, create the policy and the group to allow CircleCI to upload the images into ECR repository. Okay, let's go to IAM. And first of all, let's create the group. And group will contain the you can create users and it will simplify the user management in the future. You can create the group, attach some policies, and then when you create the new user, you can put that user in that group. So let's create the new group and call it CircleCI. And right now we're not gonna attach any policies. Let's click next and create group. And it's gonna be empty group, no users, no policies. No, nothing. All right, so now let's create customer managed policy. And it will allow us to manage our user better so we can define what repositories the CircleCI user will be able to access. Okay, so let's create policy. Let's switch to JSON format. It's just much easier to use JSON. And then let me paste the policy first and I will explain what does it mean. Okay, that's the policy and we have the two statements in that policy. The first statement, it will allow us to get authorization token. Not us, but the CircleCI user, of course. And it have to have the resource and it has to represent the everything. That's the requirement for that particular statement and action that our user have to have. This is one. And the second one, this allow statement. We will allow our CircleCI user to upload the images, to push images to our ECR repository. And optionally, we can define either star. If you're gonna put here star, it will be allowed to push images in every repository, but I want to restrict it to certain repositories only. And I can specify what kind of resources here. So that's the IRN, and then that's the region. And let me show you where it's coming from. Let me open container registry again. And here our repository, and this is the, well, basically that's the region, right? North Virginia. So, and that's the account number. You can grab it from here. And of course, Slack CI/CD is the repository name. All right, so this is done. Now let's click review policy and let's call it allow push-pull policy, push-pull images. All right, so let's create this policy. The next step is to attach this policy to our group. So let's go to the group. Let's select our CircleCI group and let's click attach policy. And let's select our policy that we just created, allow push-pull images. Let's select and click attach policy. All right, now it's attached to the group. And finally, now let's go ahead and create the user. Let's add user. Let's call it CircleCI. We're gonna give it only programmatic access and click next permissions. And here we can actually put it in the CircleCI group. And let's give it a name. CircleCI User. This is optional. Okay, let's click Review and create. Okay, so we created the user and we will need our credentials. Let's click. Okay, now let's go ahead and let's download our credentials. Let's click download. And we're going to be using these credentials later on to upload images to our ECR repository. Right, so this is done. Now let's go back to our Slack bot. So this is the application that we built in previous episodes, and it's a very simple one file, 26 lines code. This is the Slack bot that allows us to watch events in the Slack and then react to events and send messages. And right, so it can be any Node.js application. So it's just an example that we built before, and later on we will configure we will deploy it in the next video. So we will deploy it in Kubernetes and configure continuous delivery. All right, so this is our very simple application, Node.js, and let's go ahead and create a couple packages for to be able to test our application. Right now we don't have any tests, and I'm gonna create dummy test, and I will show you how you can use it in your CircleCI build and how you can visualize that tests. Okay, now let's go ahead and install a couple of the modules. The first one will be Mocha. This is the testing framework for one of many testing frameworks for the Node, for the JavaScript. And the second package will be the Mocha JUnit Reporter. All right, let me install it quickly, and we will use this package just to generate the XML file, and then the CircleCI will be able to read this XML file and visualize it in the CircleCI UI itself. All right, let's go back to the CircleCI, and we can see that we just added these two dependencies, Mocha and this reporter. All right, this is done. Now let's create very dummy simple test. Let's create the folder test. And let's create the test.js file in that folder. So let me paste it first. This test has nothing to do with our application. This is just the dummy test that verifies something, and like I said, it has nothing to do with the application. It's just for you to show you that we can run it in the CircleCI, any tests, and we can visualize them as well. So let's save this test, and we can even run it. So the next step is we need to update package.json, and we need to update our test command. So let me paste it first. Okay, this is our test command, and basically you can run only Mocha and it will run it, and the rest of the arguments on the right hand side here, reporter, all this stuff, we will be using only to generate the XML file. And we can run it locally, and npm test, and it's not gonna output the results, it will just put it in the result XML. We can quickly take a look on it. Cut XML. All right, so this is the results, one test, etc. Not interesting. All right, and finally, let's go ahead and create the CircleCI config. Let's create the CircleCI folder first in the root directory. It will be, you need to start it with a dot. And then the config itself is config.yaml and without a. So it's YAML. All right, let me paste some parts of our config. This is not the entire config, but it's just the first step. Let me close the rest of it. Okay, so it starts with a version. What kind of version of the CircleCI we will be using to read and execute this config? This is the 2.1 version of the schema of that file. All right, and now the next step is to we're gonna use some orbs, right? So orbs is some kind of reusable packages like functions that provided by they open source, and they mostly open source, and you can build your own orbs as well. And they provide you ability to reuse some of the commands. So it's just the way how you can drastically reduce the number of commands that you need to define manually, like npm install modules, etc. So there are a bunch of boilerplate commands that you need to run, but those orbs will use, well, it's like the abstraction layer that allows you to just use the high level inputs, and then it will run your commands. All right, and this is the information. If you want to get more information about those orbs and functions and some arguments, you can open it and scroll down, and you can see that there are a bunch of input parameters that it can accept. All right, so this is the orb. Then we need to define the jobs. So there are two main components, I would say. Jobs, this is the name of the job test, and then you have the workflows, right? So node tests, and this is the jobs, and this is the name of the job that we just defined here. So that's the test. Now I want to use exactly the same version of the node that I use to build the Docker image. If you take a look in the prod, I use the 14, and in the multi-stage Docker file, the second stage 14 as well. So that's why I want to use the specific version of the node. Then, well, steps checkout, I will git clone, and then this is the optional again. I have the option to identify what kind of package manager I want to use, npm, yarn. In this case, npm is actually default value. Then I'm gonna run some tests, npm test. Here I will store the result. That in this command we will generate the XML file, and here I will store it in temporary directory, store artifacts, and I needed to then point it to store. This is again one of the special commands that you can use in order to identify and show where your results located. Those are the optional, again, just to show you that CircleCI can actually see the test results. And then you will define your jobs. And right now you can run in parallel. And right now I have one single job test. All right, so now this is ready. Let's go to the CircleCI now. Let me close this. And okay, this is the main page of the CircleCI. And if you logged in with GitHub and you go to the projects, and it will show you all your available projects that you can set up the CircleCI build. In my case, I have this particular CircleCI repository that's we modify, and I want to set up the project for it. Let me click set up project. Now it will offer me some of the examples. I already have one, so I don't need it. I'm gonna say use existing config, and let me click start building right away. Right now we don't have the config just yet, so it will fail. So it's build 35 because I already tested and tried it, and that's why it's not starts. It starts from 35. There are a bunch of other builds. So that's what you're gonna see. You will see that the config is not presented in the repository. Now let's commit git. Let me run status. So we updated a bunch of stuff and created folder, CircleCI folder, install packages, etc. So let's add everything. Git add, git commit -m to give it a message, and then add CircleCI integration. Oh, well, can't spell it. CircleCI is fine. Right, so, and let's push it. Let's push it. Okay, now it's pushed. to the remote repository, to the GitHub. And then if you take a look, the CircleCI was able to detect that there was a change, right? So the commit was created in GitHub, in remote GitHub, and it detected it and it started building. So let me click on success. And this is the test you see here. If you, that's exactly this particular job is referenced here. So let me open this test. And like I said, those are the green checkbox identify each separate command run. So we have more than we defined here. That's why when I was saying that the orb is the abstraction layer, it abstracts all those boilerplate commands like restoring cache, npm, and packages installed, etc. So that's why you see a bunch of them. They come from this orb. And for example, this particular command we created manually, run mocha tests, come from here. Then we stored artifacts, uploading artifacts, that's the command, and then store test results. That's the last one. And now if you take a look here, tests, you can see that the CircleCI was able to read XML file, and it was able to get the data from there. And it says one test. So we have only one test here under this test directory, test, and it was passed successfully. All right. So that's all for this integration. Every time when you commit, it will detect the change and it will build the new. It will build it and test it, but not gonna upload anything just yet. All right. So the next step is to add additional orb. So we're gonna be using ECR, AWS ECR Orb. Let's go to our config, and on the top, let me add additional orb. And again, this is the information link where you can find more information about supported arguments. And we're going to be using AWS ECR Orb. All right, so, and now we can add this particular job right away to the workflow. Let me paste it here. Okay. All right, let me close this, close the test. And this is the second part. And this is the test that will build and test our code. And the second one, AWS ECR, this indicates that it comes from this particular orb. And the job name is build and push image. Let me show you. This is the name. Let me grab this URL. Open it. And for example, this is one of the pre-built command, I would say. You can go back here, search for it, and then jobs, commands. And there are a bunch of parameters that it can, bunch of them are optional and some of them are mandatory. So you can take a look what, like Docker file, the name of the Docker file, etc. So a bunch of stuff that it can accept. We're gonna define only few. So the first one is the repo, right? So this is the repository, ECR repository, and it comes from the here. That's the one. Now we need to provide few tags, and you can list multiple tags. You can use comma. So by convention, many people use latest tag as well. So every time when they build the new image, they will tag it as the latest one. This is optional. And the second part is our application version starts from 0.1. And this is, I would say, the simplest way to increment your build. This is the environment variable that provided by the CircleCI. And this is the circle build number. And it will come from here. So for example, 58 here, you see 58. This is the build number. And there are multiple other ways how you can use Git tags and use them for your images. But this is just the simplest one that for this particular demo, we can, every time when we build when we create the new commit, it will create the new build and append it to our version. So every version will be incremented. All right, so then we need to provide the Docker file and then the location of the Docker file. So this is the build directory. So it's under the build. And we're gonna be using the Docker file.prod and comes from here. So this is that particular multi-stage image. And then the path. This is pretty much the same as the Docker context. So when you run Docker build and at the end you will provide the context. That's the current directory that comes from there. And then you can define other generic statements, and here it requires. So basically it says that it's not gonna run this job until this finishes successfully. So it will wait till it will test the code, and then it will build the image and upload it. If you remove this, it will run those two jobs in parallel. That's, in this case, that's not what you want. All right, so this is done. And also this particular orb, AWS ECR Orb, expects few environment variables. You can provide them here as an arguments, but I would suggest you that you use environment variables and define in the CircleCI project. Okay, and let me grab the first one, AWS Access Key ID. And this is from our CircleCI user. Okay, let's go back to our CircleCI project. Let's click on project settings. And on the left hand side, you have the environment variables. And right now we don't have any. Let's add environment variable, the first one. And this is going to be the key. And you saw that I downloaded the credentials and it's located here. So new user credentials. Let me cut it. So those are credential, key and secret. Okay, let me grab the first key. Add environment variable. All right, this is the first one. The second one is the access key. Let me add it as well, access key. And that's the second one. Okay, add environment variable. And then let me take a look. We have two more, AWS region. All right, so let's add environment variable and the region US East 1 for our repository. And the last environment variable is the AWS ECR account URL. Let me paste it here. And this account URL comes from this repository. So if you grab the whole thing, this one, it starts from the account and then the region and then the amazon.com. Grab the whole thing and paste it here. So this is the account URL, the whole thing. Let's add this. All right, now we have all the environment variables, all 4. And okay, that's it. Now, and well, like I said, please like this video. It really helps with YouTube search. Okay, so now let's create a new commit. Let me run git status, and we updated this CircleCI config. Git add git commit add ECR git push. Right, so we pushed the commit, and now let's take a look to the CircleCI. Let me close this, and we can see it detected the change, and now we have 2 jobs. Okay, so it completed the first one, test, and it now will run the second one, build and push image. Let me take a look here. So there are a bunch of commands that it will run, so we're gonna wait a little bit. Let's wait. Okay, it's finally completed, and let's take a look. If we open this, and we're gonna see a bunch of the steps, and final is push image to ECR. And let's go ahead to ECR, to our repository, and we see that we have the image now, and it's tagged. We have the 2 tags, right? The latest one and 0, 1, 60, and 60 comes from this build number, this 60. All right, so we're done. Thank you for watching. Please like this video. And in the next video, we will deploy our Slack bot to Kubernetes. And we're gonna use the cert manager and ingress and create the expose it to the internet and let Slack know that it can post messages to our Kubernetes Slack bot. Thank you for watching.